In Brussels, the statues of Leopold have not been pulled down. The old king is still part of a Belgian dynasty. Leopold's Saxe-Coburg pedigree was impeccable. His father, Leopold I, was Queen Victoria's uncle. His mother, Louise Marie d'Orléans, the eldest daughter of the French king. His father hadn't much time for the young prince, describing him as the little tyrant, and his mother remarked unkindly how he was disfigured by his enormous nose, which gives him a bird-like air.
I think his mother was rather insignificant there, and maybe also this explains a lot about his character. The lack of love, the lack of affection, which he compensated by saying that affection didn't bother him, or as he told at the end of his life when he was very unpopular, that he was not interested in popularity. Of course, this was a way of saying, I'm very sad about the fact that I'm not popular.
Leopold's arranged marriage to the 16-year-old Archduchess Maria Theresa was a disaster. A society lady summed up the match as being between a stable boy and a nun. And by nun, she meant Leopold. The couple had to get sex advice from Aunt Victoria and Uncle Albert on a visit to London. They did have 3 daughters. Their son died young, so there was no surviving male heir. At the start of his reign, Leopold proclaimed, "My ambition is to make Belgium greater, stronger, and more beautiful." He had no doubts that the country needed improving.
Leopold did always complain that Belgium was a small country with small people, but he certainly wasn't a small king. I mean, not only was he extremely tall, but I think he had enormous ambitions for himself. And I think he felt resentment about his relatively low and humble role within the Saxe-Coburg dynasty. I mean, he really wasn't very important compared with Victoria, compared with the Kaiser. And I think that he therefore felt that personally, if you like. I mean, he was somebody for whom l'État was definitely c'est moi, and therefore the elevation of Belgium was necessarily the elevation of himself.
Like his father, Leopold believed that having a colony was the way to achieve greatness. Leopold I made over 50 attempts to get a colony, all to no avail. His son was going to be more successful. Even before Leopold became king, he had sent the Belgian finance minister a piece of marble from the Acropolis inscribed, "Belgium must have a colony."
Leopold II leefde in de tweede helft van de 19e eeuw. En in feite was hij 100 jaar achter op de ideeën. Engeland, of Groot-Brittannië als je wilt, Frankrijk, Nederland, op dat moment in het laatste kwartaal van de 19e eeuw, dachten unaniem dat een kolonie geen geld moest opbrengen op de eerste plaats voor het moederland, maar dat het moederland zelf moest geld investeren en met de winst die daar gemaakt werden ter plaatse moest houden voor de administratie, voor het leger, voor de ordehandhaving en voor de inlandse bevolking. En nu Leopold II dacht er helemaal niet aan. Het moest geld opbrengen voor het moederland en niet vice versa.
Leopold set about buying his new colony. He tried Sarawak, the New Hebrides, the Fiji Islands and the Philippines, until there was practically nowhere else left for him to look, apart from one place. At the start of Leopold's reign, the Congo was unknown territory to Europeans. For Leopold, it represented his last chance. The Congo was to be his new colony, at any cost. The man who was going to make this possible was Henry Morton Stanley. A former workhouse boy from Wales, he had made himself into one of the greatest explorers of the age, and one of the roughest. His expedition to cross Africa from east to west was the most expensive ever undertaken. Stanley, coming from the east, was getting into the Congo through the back door. No white man had ever crossed the continent before. Stanley would have to walk or canoe 7,000 miles. Leopold knew that if Stanley succeeded, he would effectively open up the Congo. In the 19th century, London was the epicenter of colonization. At Claridge's, Leopold entertained explorers, geographers and generals, all to sell his Congo venture. He went to see his Aunt Victoria and gave the Queen more of the same spin. He told her, "I have sought to meet those most interested in bringing civilization to Africa." Back home, he organized a geographical conference, turning his palace into a luxury hotel for the delegates and supervising every detail. He declared that his aims in Africa were completely charitable and philanthropic. The Congo was about to receive all the benefits of civilization and Christianity.
Meteen ook, omdat hij hier in een christelijk land zat, was dat ook maar goed meegenomen dat hij daar dan meteen wel het christendom wilde helpen propageren. Alhoewel wij toch weten dat hij zo geen overtuigd christen was. Maar goed, dat is een persoonlijke zaak.
Each of the conference delegates received a portrait of the king. Leopold knew exactly how to use snobbery as a weapon. The news that Stanley had successfully crossed Africa was the signal for Leopold to act. In his scrawling handwriting, he wrote to an aide that he did not want to miss out on this magnificent African cake. Stanley today, like Leopold, is unwanted in Kinshasa. But in 1887, Stanley was the man that the king needed. Under the guise of a charitable organization, the International Africa Association, Leopold hired Stanley to make the Congo fit for a king.
La réputation de Stanley est celle d'un bâtisseur, d'un pacificateur, d'un constructeur. En réalité, ce qu'il a fait, c'est d'abord de casser, de briser, de détruire tout ce qui existait avant. Et à la place, c'est vrai qu'il construit quelque chose de nouveau, une logique marchande et une logique politique. Et ce nouveau système, il le met au service de l'Occident et en particulier au service du roi Léopold II.
Stanley established a network of steamers, built roads and bridges, and even a small railway. He soon earned the name Bula Matadi, the smasher of rocks. But behind Stanley's back, Leopold was changing the Charitable African Association into a commercial company. His new Congo Association would be run exclusively for profit. He wrote to an aide, "Care must be taken not to let it be obvious that the Congo Association and the African Association are different. The public doesn't grasp that." The king issued new orders. He now wanted official treaties to show that the Congo belonged to him. Stanley was told to get the chiefs to sign up. Stanley's men used bribes and trickery to obtain the Congolese chiefs' agreement. They claimed that the white man even had power over the sun.
Unscrupulous though Leopold was, he realised that he needed to have some veil of legality. And Leopold was very clever. He'd investigated the precedents for this. He'd looked at the sultans of Sarawak. He'd looked at North American Indians. He'd looked even at some of the Indian treaties that the British had established. And he realised that with these bits of paper, if he ever came to be challenged, as he was later, over his authority over this territory, he would be able to produce these ostensible contracts. So Stanley was absolutely crucial in achieving that.
Having tricked the Africans, the king now set about convincing the European powers that he should be allowed to own this vast African colony. This time, it wasn't magic, it was diplomacy. By 1884, the great powers were all lined up in Berlin to hand over the Congo to the king. No Africans were invited.
Ce document C'est l'acte général de la conférence du Congo, publié le 26 février 1885 à Berlin. Ce document est connu dans l'histoire comme étant l'acte général de la conférence de Berlin. Léopold II, roi de Belge, n'était pas présent à Berlin.
The conference gave Leopold everything he wanted.
It's very remarkable to see that King Leopold managed to trick the great powers at that time. He promised that everybody would have access to that, there would be free trade, that if there was anything to be gained, that everybody could participate in the loot. And there was quite some remorse afterwards in other countries that he got away with it. But he did.
Le Congo est à peine reconnu par les grandes puissances comme propriété personnelle de Léopold II que le roi met en branle sa machine infernale. Dès le 1er juillet 1885, un décret stipule que toutes les terres vacantes, des terres vacantes, sont propriété de l'État. En 91 et en 92, d'autres décrets vont déclarer les produits de la forêt appartenant exclusivement à l'État. Et les indigènes ne peuvent pas les exploiter, sauf pour l'État. Donc, en un tour de main, Léopold II a dépouillé les Africains de tous leurs biens et transformé le Congo en un vaste camp de travail forcé.
To enforce his rule, the sovereign king had created an army. In time, it would be 16,000 strong, equipped with modern Belgian-made automatic rifles. The novelist Joseph Conrad was in the Congo Free State from the start. As a result of what he saw there, he wrote Heart of Darkness.
They grabbed what they could get for the sake of what was to be got. It was just robbery with violence, aggravated murder on a great scale, as is very proper for those who tackle a darkness.
Bango bazaki na mindoki okoki kobunana yete bakobete bino masasi lokola nyama koboma bato ebele bakovanda ndako te bakovanda ka obele kuna boyi na zamba lokola nyama.
Fear, like forced labor, was an integral part of the king's plans to make the Congo profitable. A British diplomat recalled how Leopold laughed at the idea of respecting the rights of the native and talked of having a garrison to coerce them into paying revenue.
Underpinning this, as usual, is an idea. It's not just practical politics. This is the high point of scientific racism and the view that in Africa you have a quite distinct group of people with a different physiognomy, with a different mentality, with different intellectual capacities, and that they basically, whether it's because of their inherent biological nature or because of their culture, they won't work for money, they won't work for the normal incentives. They were fundamentally lazy and barbaric and savage.
Toute l'entreprise de Léopold II repose sur une profonde contradiction. D'un côté, il veut réaliser ce rêve merveilleux qu'il a fait, ouvrir le corps du continent africain au commerce, amener les Africains au christianisme, imprimer au Congo les marques du progrès de la civilisation. Mais sur le terrain, c'est le contraire. Partout, c'est la terreur qui règne, l'appât du gain. Partout, c'est la chasse à l'homme. Pour les Africains, c'est certainement la nuit la plus noire. Le rêve s'est transformé en cauchemar.
The conquest of the earth, which mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much.